Welcome to Chandler in Focus. I'm Vice Mayor Kevin Hartke, and my guests today are Chandler resident and Medal of Honor recipient Fred Ferguson, and also Chandler resident and Chandler Postmaster Chris Arroyo. And we are here today to discuss the recent unveiling of a series of U.S. postal stamps that depict Medal of Honor recipients who fought during the Vietnam War. And before we get started, I'd like you to, if you take a minute and introduce yourself, say hello to our audience and tell us about yourselves. Fred, why don't you start?
I'm Fred Ferguson. I'm a retired Army major, wore the uniform of the United States for 37 years. And I've been living in Chandler for a long time.
Thank you for your service, 37 years. Thank you. And Chris, how about yourself?
I've been postmaster of Chandler since 2006. I'm an Arizona native. I've lived in Chandler for 25 years and enjoy the heat.
Well, it's beginning of summer here in Arizona, and you'll get plenty of chances over the next several weeks to do that, won't you? Well, Chris, the Medal of Honor postage stamps that we also brought copies of here, they recognize heroes who served in the Vietnam War. What's the history of the Medal of Honor stamps, and what is unique about them?
Well, there's a series that came out. They started in 2013, and the Postal Service is honoring living members of the armed services who were recipients of the Medal of Honor. In 2013, it was World War II. In 2014, it was the Korean War. And this year was those of the Vietnam War who served in Vietnam. And those are the veterans that Postal Service is honoring.
And of these stamps, how many do we have in Arizona here?
One, Mr. Ferguson.
Well, that is fantastic. I already knew that because I got to go to your other event, but I'm sure our audience didn't know that. So talk to us about the event that we had on Memorial Day at the American Legion Post.
Well, we had it, like to thank American Legion Post 35 because they hosted the event, and their leadership was instrumental in making it, a wonderful opportunity to honor Mr. Ferguson, and especially since he's a local Chandler resident. He's the only living Arizona Medal of Honor recipient that's depicted on the stamps. He's a local Chandler resident, and it gave the Chandler Post Office an opportunity to honor him and to put especially with the amount of veterans that we have working for the post office, it was just an opportunity to put him out there up front and to celebrate, what he represents to all veterans and to the 250 employees of the Chandler Post Office.
So what's the process of deciding who and what gets printed on a stamp? Obviously, there was a lot of thought of this, and I understand that certainly these individuals were worthy of honor, but it seems like the post office does a lot of special editions. How does that happen?
It's pretty much done by suggestions, public suggestions. There's a lot of suggestions that get turned in every year, and there's a Citizens Stamp Advisory Board that meets quarterly and sifts through all the suggestions, and they're the ones who determine what's going to be on a stamp and what isn't. And they'll make those determinations, and those are the stamps that'll be coming out.
And have we had any suggestions that came through our post office or locally in Arizona that resulted in a stamp that you can recall in your long history?
Well, the ones that come to mind are obviously the states. Arizona, every state had a stamp, and Arizona had submitted what was going to be on the stamp, what's going to be depicted, whether it's a bird or the flower, whatever's going to represent the state. Other than that, I don't recall anything specific locally, that was targeted on a specific stamp that came out.
Oh, very good. Well, Mr. Ferguson, you are one of a few people in our nation to have been awarded the Medal of Honor for your heroic actions in Vietnam. Now, I've listened to your story, but what does that mean to you?
Well, I guess the biggest thing is, and what it's meant to me is some of my fellow soldiers thought enough of the action to go to all the trouble to recommend me, because it's a daunting process to award the Medal of Honor. It's not something you do easily. It takes a long time, and the documentation is horrendous. They're very careful about it. But the fact that my fellow soldiers went to the trouble to do it, that means a lot to me.
And were these soldiers that were with you on this particular event?
The people who were with me, to my knowledge, other than we wrote statements, obviously, of what we conceived that happened. Of course, you know, it's like anything else. Although, you know, my crew, there were 4 of us in a helicopter, and we're all doing different stuff and everything, and we all saw things a little differently. And there were 3 gunships covering us, so there's 12 more people who saw things, and they're all a little different. So we all write statements, and somebody somewhere sorts all this crap out and decides what happened.
Oh, very good.
It's like I don't know if you've ever been to a sheriff's posse thing, but when R.G. Dick Godby here was a sheriff, I was one of his posse guys because he and I were buddies. And I went through a training down there at the thing, and they said, okay, we're going to show you a video of they did the whole thing. They told us all that it's a circle case, it's going to be robbed. Here's what the guy looks like. Here's what he's wearing and everything. And then we watched the video, and we all write down what we saw. There were 20 of us in the room. None of us wrote the same thing down. And they told us ahead of time what we were going to do. So, I mean, it's perception.
I understand that. So you're also part of a Congressional Medal of Honor Society. What is that, and what does that mean?
The society consists of the living recipients of the Medal of Honor. There are 79 living today. So everybody, if you have the Medal of Honor, you're in the society. And the society is, our headquarters is on the Yorktown in Pleasant Grove, South Carolina. It's right outside of Charleston. And it's the second Yorktown. The first Yorktown was sunk at the Battle of Midway. And this is the second Essex class that was built after that, and later got an angled deck and some other stuff. But it's an old carrier, and it's there. And they're trying to build a brick and mortar museum there for the Medal of Honor that they're trying to raise money for. But basically, it's just we give out scholar. We have a foundation that sits beside us. This consists of a board, and there's really some shakers and movers on the board. People like Nick Grasso and people like that. And we raise money, we give scholarships, and some of the guys go around to high schools and grade schools and speak, and just we do patriotic events all year long, all around the country.
That sounds very notable. So the 79 is more than just obviously with NOM. So what's the oldest person and what's the youngest person in this group? Do you recall?
Yeah, I'd have to go on the website and look. The oldest obviously is World War II. It's probably Woody Williams. I don't know. John Finn was for a long time, but he just recently passed away. And he got his medal at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. And he was a senior chief at the time. And he lived to the age of 100. And just recently passed away. But it's probably Woody Williams. He's our chaplain, and he got his medal. He was a Marine on Iwo with a flamethrower.
Wow.
But I'd have to look to see. But there's not a lot of the World War II guys left.
I understand that. My dad was a World War II guy and passed away.
My dad was in World War II in Korea.
Yeah. Well, we want to talk a little bit more about your story, but now we're going to watch a video clip that's prepared.
I first enlisted in the Navy in August of 1958 because I was finishing high school. I didn't want to go to college, and then I was schooled out. I didn't know really what I wanted to do with my life. I'd been taking flying lessons prior to entering the Navy, and did in fact get my private license while I was in the Navy. I was working out at Deer Valley Airport after I got out of the Navy, flying skydivers, doing charter work and some little instruction. And a guy came through there with a helicopter from the Hiller factory. And he was giving rides, trying to sell helicopters to anybody take a ride. So I took a ride in this helicopter. And it was just fantastic. I mean, what a machine that is. I mean, it was really something.
After his first helicopter ride, Frederick Ferguson knew immediately that he wanted to become a helicopter pilot. He enlisted in the Army to take part in the Warrant Officer program and became certified in rotary-winged aircraft. 2 weeks after graduating from the program in May of 1967, Ferguson found himself in Vietnam, a co-pilot with the 227th Aviation Battalion of the 1st Cavalry. Before long, he was in command of his own UH-1D Slick helicopter. In January 1968, at the beginning of the Tet Offensive, Ferguson was on a routine mission when he overheard an emergency radio call that would change his life.
I was given a mission to go south to take some engineers down to where a truck had been ambushed and blown off the road, and they needed to clear the road. So I took them down there and dropped them off and was going back north. And we were listening to the radio that one of our aircraft from my company had in fact been shot down. And of course we were, concerned about who the crew was and what their status was. And you get little bits and pieces on the radio. And when we got up there, we found out that in fact a helicopter had been shot down inside the city of Hue, and that there were survivors, and they had taken refuge in the South Vietnamese Army compound, but they were all wounded and nobody knew their status. 3 helicopters from other units had attempted a rescue and been driven off by the intense anti-aircraft fire, and then the Corps put out the order to stay clear of Hue because the anti-aircraft fire was just too heavy. It was just not survivable for a helicopter. So it looked like the Corps commander wanted to leave our soldiers there. Of course, we don't do that. We don't leave soldiers. I asked my crew if they would go with me on a rescue attempt. And then I set about finding some gunship guys to cover us, because I figured that we would have a better chance of pulling this off if we were doing a little shooting back, as opposed to just getting shot at. So I found 3 gunships that were not decisively engaged at the time, and those 3 crews agreed to go with us. So we started down low level down the Perfume River as we got in close to Hue. And of course the gunships were right behind me shooting. I mean, we were getting fire from everywhere, boats, buildings. The NVA owned the town. It was their town. We were taking fire from all quadrants, and my gunners were returning fire with their M60s, and the gunships were shooting, suppressing as best they could. And of course I was concentrating on flying the helicopter and watching the compound that I was going and figuring, and you could hear the bullets hitting the helicopter. So I saw the compound, and that's when I saw the big flagpole in the middle of it that nobody told me about. And I was looking at the buildings and the flagpole, and I figured I just barely had enough clearance to get in there with a 48-foot rotor system. Came over the wall, just did what we call a decel, put the collective pitch down, pulled the cyclic back in my lap, stood the helicopter on her tail. And that's when I found out that there was a lot of dust in the compound. And so all of a sudden I couldn't see where I was going. And I knew there was a flagpole and I knew there was a building, but I had no idea where they were because I could not see it. So I just said, well, plant the helicopter. So I planted the helicopter, and as they were loading the wounded, the dust started to clear a little bit. And I had about equal distance between the flagpole and the building with my rotor blades. There was about 2 feet on either side. Now, is that great piloting skill? Is that luck? Was somebody helping me? Don't know. And just as we were loading the wounded on, the first mortar round hit, maybe 10 or 15 seconds after we were on the ground, and hit right by the tail boom and wounded my crew chief. And we're dragging the guys on, and one of the guys in the back said, okay, we got them all, let's go. So I started pulling pitch, and of course then as soon as I start pulling pitch, then the dust starts coming up again because I'm kicking all this wind up. And I can't see anything anymore, so I just pulled a whole handful of power, pulled her straight up as I could go. And I just left the nose low, pulled in all the power she would give me and then some, and headed southeast.
Ferguson's helicopter had been severely damaged by mortar fragments, and his gunners had expended all of their ammunition. But Ferguson deftly maneuvered his aircraft back through treacherous enemy territory and delivered the wounded soldiers to safety.
One of the gunships did not make it all the way back to a secure fire base, but he was far enough away from the enemy-controlled city that the crew was was picked up safely. My crew chief was wounded slightly, and the other 2 gunships made it back to friendly fire bases. I got mine back to Wei Fubai, where the aid station was, because that's where we needed to go with the wounded. And we got them back there, and then we called maintenance, and they came over and told me what a darn fool I was for getting the helicopter all tore up like that. We got the 5 guys out. You know, you read about this thing when you're a kid, but you don't ever, in your wildest dreams, suspect that any time in your lifetime that you would ever be thought of to receive this award. You know, I'm in awe of my fellow recipients. And to me, that is the greatest honor, to be associated with this band of brothers. There's a comradeship between people in the military that civilians can't understand. And I don't ask you to understand it, because there's no way you can understand it. And especially in a combat zone, where your actions can affect my well-being, and my actions can affect your well-being. There's a comradeship there. There's a brotherhood that you won't find anywhere else, that I've never found anywhere else. It needed to be done. If I was there, they would come after me.
And welcome back. And I understand also that in relationship to the division that you served in Nam, that a book was written, a movie was made starring Mel Gibson.
The 1st Cavalry Division, which is the division I served with in Vietnam, was the Air Mobile Division, was the test bed, and then became the 1st Cavalry and went to Vietnam in 1965. One of the first big battles of American soldiers and the NVA, they weren't Viet Cong, or NVA regulars, was in the Battle of the Ai Drai. And Hal Moore, Lieutenant Colonel at the time, later Lieutenant General, was the commander of the 1st and the 7th Cavalry on the ground in LZ X-ray. And he fought these guys for about 3 days and beat them. But it was a hair, teeth, and eyeballs, and really, really tough. And Joe Galloway, who was a UPI reporter on the ground with him, and General Moore later wrote a book called We Were Soldiers Once and Young. And then they made that into the movie, or We Were Soldiers. And I know several guys who were there, and I asked them, movie, Hollywood, and they said it's about 75-25. About 75 real, about 25 Hollywood. So that's not too bad.
Yeah, I guess that's what you said earlier about the perception on how you look at a story. Hollywood's
Absolutely,
got its own way of the same. So I also understand that you've been involved in bringing the Military Benefit Expo home to Chandler a couple years ago.
I was involved when I didn't do it. I was working for the Arizona Department of Veteran Services. This was my last real job, and the problem that I saw was that veterans outside of the city of Phoenix didn't really have a lot of. We had some counselors in Tucson and one on the Havasu. Mostly, if you lived in Bullhead City or Snowflake or something like that, you didn't have anything. You had to come to Phoenix. Well, you know, they got jobs and stuff. They can't be coming down here to visit and talk about benefits, and they didn't understand. So we went around and we tried to get towns outside of the Phoenix area to hold these expos, and we got them going. To me, the Chandler is the only one still doing it that I'm aware of. I don't know that for a fact, because I left the department in December of '06, so it's been a while. But I worked with Commander Sepulveda and Colonel Orlando and Donna Wallace, who was on the council at the time, and they put together a really good program that to me it's still going on, and it gives veterans a chance. And we'll bring in VA hospital people, VA counselors. We'll bring in state people, and just anybody that they want to talk to. Sometimes we'll bring a judge in. They can take care of tickets, and it's a one-stop, one-shop deal, and it's a good deal for the veterans.
That's a great concept, but I suppose is there a number of employers that also show up at that to see for some job opportunities?
Yeah, they do have employment counseling there. I mean, it's a big deal, and the Chandler still does it once a year. And Chandler is to be commended for continuing to do that.
I think that's been a passion of our mayor, Mayor Tibshraeny, and I know that I've gone to the last several at the Center of the Arts over there in the foyer, so I look forward to continuing this. So Chris, let's ask you a couple more questions to get Fred off the hot seat here. So when you were a kid, did you collect stamps?
No, I did not. I got exposed later on when I got into the post office.
Okay, so tell us about stamp collecting and the types of things that the post office even does to assist or enable those who are stamp collectors.
Well, there's a lot of things. The thing about stamp collecting is there's a wide variety of events depicted on there, historical figures, historical events. If you're interested, you can pick a subject, and you can target certain stamps, and then there's a variety of things related to that. It's a really good hobby to have. It's a documentation to an extent of what's going on in the country with the post office, because a lot of events and historical figures are on the stamps and the story behind them. And if you want information, you can go to the website, USPSstamps.com, and you can find a lot about what to do, what to get started, who to talk to, and where to pursue some of the stamps we have available.
Is there, have you heard of, through Chandler, I'm adding some ad-lib questions here, of just some rare stamps coming through that surprised people?
Not recently, no. That doesn't mean they don't come through. A lot of times when something rare that has value is usually a mistake. A lot of times that'll add a lot of value. Something's upside down, or the original intent is not what's produced, and that adds a lot of value. But recently, I haven't really heard of anything. They've done a pretty good job printing stuff up. Yeah.
Well, very good. I think when I was a kid, for Boy Scouts, I had to collect something, so I chose pennies. I think my brother did stamps, and now my pennies I'll hand down to a grandkid one of these days. So they have some value maybe then. So.
Lieutenant Griffin of the Army Nurse Corps, who had the misfortune to marry me, and later became a nurse practitioner in town, but she collects stamps, and she's got a ton of them.
Yeah.
And I go out of my way to find stamps for her. I don't know what she does with them, but she collects the heck out of them. So.
Well, I won't ask if she thinks it's a misfortune to have been married to you.
Oh, she'll agree with me, yeah.
She'll agree with you? She's an agreeable person. Well, very good. So, Mr. Ferguson, again, is there a message you'd like to share with our viewers, particularly our young audience, regarding teamwork and heroism? I was really struck by listening to you at the event at the American Legion, how quick you were just to talk about teamwork. And maybe you were the one whose face was on the stamp, but obviously you wouldn't have been there without everyone around you.
No, like I said earlier in the program here, my helicopter, I was the aircraft commander, but I had a co-pilot and a crew chief and a gunner, and we had the 3 gunships covering us. And so there were, 16 folks involved in this mission. Now, it was my idea, and I was in charge. So I got the medal, but Buck Anderson, my co-pilot, Lieutenant Anderson, later retired from the National Guard as a colonel, was sitting right beside me. There's about 2 feet between our rear ends in that helicopter, so I mean, he's right there. We're all right there together. We're all getting shot at the same time. So it was a crew concept. But I would like to leave you with this, if I could. A sobering thought from the 19th century English philosopher John Stuart Mill, who offered these timeless admonitions. War is an ugly thing, but not the ugliest of things. The decay and degraded state of morale and patriotic feeling which thinks that nothing is worth war is much worse. A man who has nothing for which he is willing to fight, nothing for which he is willing, cares more than his own personal safety, is a miserable creature that has no chance of being free unless made and kept so by the exhortations of better men than himself. We are free today because of the men and women of the armed forces, and they're out there right now carrying 90-pound packs in unbelievable temperature and unbelievable conditions. They're flying off aircraft carriers. They're flying all over the place, and they're doing marvelous things, and they're keeping us free. And we can never, ever pay them enough for what they do. Or we owe them so much.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you for those words. So Chris, is there anything as we kind of wrap up this show that you'd like to share with our viewers or thoughts that you have?
Well, the only thing is just to, regarding, it was an honor to be, to have a small part in, in this process. And as far as my career goes, that's one of the wonderful things about, stamp unveilings, noting, significant events or people, is I might not get another opportunity to do something like this or similar to this. So I'm really grateful that I got the opportunity to be a part of celebrating, what Mr. Ferguson represents with the armed services. So I'm grateful for that.
Mr. Ferguson, after I think I posted on Facebook your event at the American Legion, I got a couple phone calls from people wanting to get in contact with you. So do you have opportunity to speak often in children or other groups?
I am very careful about what I do anymore.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you. And Chris, I understand that you've got that set of stamps here.
Yes, I do.
See if we can get that signed by our esteemed guest here.
There's my first stamp
Again,
collector.
I am Kevin Hartke, and this is Chandler in Focus. Thank you, and see you next time.